everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm talking about Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green. I don't have the book to hold up because I listened to it on Audible instead. I do love a physical book and I do love John Green signing everything as he always does, much to his detriment because he now has an injury from it. But I also love just hearing him talk about the things that he's passionate about, and he is very, very passionate about tuberculosis. In fact, everything to John is about tuberculosis, hence the title of this novel. This book was so wonderful. I, wouldn't naturally be interested in reading a book about tuberculosis. I think a lot of people might say the same thing because, it's not something that is an issue in society in America or in the UK, in rich white countries where, it's cured and, it's not really a lot of tuberculosis floating around. And if you do get it, then you can get cured fairly easily and cost effectively. However, tuberculosis is the most deadly infectious disease in the world, currently, now, today. It has been for a long time. It was briefly overtaken by COVID in 2020, 2021, maybe 2022, can't remember. But tuberculosis is back in the #1 spot. In this book, John talks a lot about the history of tuberculosis and how so many events in history come back to tuberculosis. For example, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, the Archduke that triggered World War I to start, was probably done because of tuberculosis. The assassins that were hired, a few of them, didn't end up going through with it. The ones that did, the 3, had tuberculosis and, were going to die of it anyway. And even though the assassination went kind of poorly and, Gavrilo Princip ended up doing it just out of chance, like the Archduke happened to come by where he was and he was like, we'll do it now. But he probably wouldn't have been as bold as he was if he didn't have tuberculosis. So without tuberculosis, we may not have had World War I. He talks about how New Mexico is a state because of tuberculosis. This was mainly inhabited by Mexicans and therefore wasn't considered a state because of racism. And, New Mexico were like, how can we market ourselves and make ourselves more white so that we can become a state? And they did this by saying, like, come if you've got tuberculosis, this desert air is perfect for helping recover from tuberculosis. And people did. All of the white tuberculins, people with consumption, came to New Mexico and then it became a state. He talks about the history of consumption as being romanticised within white circles, white rich circles. It was seen as a beauty standard to be really pale, big eyes, sort of skinny and wasting away from disease. They kind of thought that consumption came with a certain personality type, that you would be really artistic and an artist. Lots of poets and artists succumbed to the consumption. And this meant that the disease was romanticised rather than stigmatised. At the time, they actually thought that black people couldn't get tuberculosis because of racism, basically. They thought this was like a romantic white artist's disease. That perception has changed over time, and now tuberculosis seems to affect more black people in poor communities such as those in Sierra Leone, which is where John Green visited and started to learn more about modern day tuberculosis and how it's still a big killer. He visited a tuberculosis hospital in Sierra Leone and he met a boy named Henry who has the same name as his son and appeared to be a young child about the same age as his son, I think 9 or 10 at the time. Turns out Henry was actually 17. He was just very stunted from malnutrition and from his disease. And by connecting with Henry, John Green started to really care about tuberculosis. Tuberculosis now within these communities is heavily stigmatised. When someone becomes diagnosed with tuberculosis, they're often cast out by all their friends and family. Henry's fortunate that his mum sticks by his side. However, many people in these tuberculosis hospitals have lost everything and are losing hope. And that's such a far cry from where our perception of tuberculosis started with the romanticisation. Through sharing Henry's story, John Green talks a lot about the racism associated with, how people receive treatment for tuberculosis. Henry was told that his treatment was not cost effective, but John points out, don't know if he points it out in the book or in other interviews I've watched, but his brother Hank Green, when he was diagnosed with cancer, which cost a lot more to treat, was never told that that wasn't cost effective to treat. And that's, it's racism at the core of this. It's looking at certain people as deserving to live and deserving to have treatment, and certain people not deserving it. And by sharing this story, John Green encourages us to have humanity for other people who deserve to have the treatment that does exist and is out there. Tuberculosis is rife and killing people in communities where getting the treatment to them is hard. This has recently become even more difficult because the US was sending tuberculosis treatment and aid to countries like Sierra Leone. Now, with the Trump administration, they are stopping a lot of foreign aid, which is stopping getting the treatment to these countries, to the people that need them, which is a disaster. It takes, many months of antibiotics to treat and cure tuberculosis, and if there's any break in treatment at all, it can result in tuberculosis evolving and becoming treatment resistant, which means that the person might then succumb and die from their tuberculosis. This is really devastating because the treatment is literally just sitting in warehouses rotting and just not getting to the right people, and people are dying because of that. I think it's good that this book is coming out now, where we can drum up some, passion and care about the topic and maybe get this cure to the people that need it. However, unfortunately, the situation does seem quite dire. I really appreciated that John handled topics like racism, privilege, colonialism, and it emphasised the damage that people like America and the UK, mainly the UK I guess, through the British Empire, have really decimated these communities. He had a chapter about, I think it was about Sierra Leone, and how the railways in the country were all to the coast, all for trade, moving things out of the country and to the UK or maybe other countries, and how the railways didn't connect the communities to each other. And as a result of this colonialism, the whole culture and structure of the country is about trade and serving us, I suppose, rather than each other and connecting each other in community, which is really catastrophic and must have adverse effects to this day. And that's something I didn't know a lot about, because in British schools we aren't taught a lot about the British Empire and what it was about and what we actually did, especially not in Scottish schools. I think in Scotland we act a little bit like a victim of the English in some senses, but we have been with the English for a long time and been part of Great Britain, so the empire was the Scottish Empire as well. We are complicit in it too, and I think it's good to reckon with the reality of the devastation caused by the empire back then and still today. I don't have many critiques of this book. It was really good. I definitely recommend reading it, especially if you're a John Green fan, but even if you're not, it was very interesting. He's a very good writer, very compelling. He's got a good way of making it all hopeful as well, and it's nice to hear that Henry is doing well, that he didn't succumb to his illness, that he is encouraged, and that he's now at university. And side note, I just really love John Green. I'm never going to criticise him too much because I'm a big fan, honestly. I've followed him since 2011, been part of the Vlog Brothers since then and their community, and I think him and Hank are just wonderful people. John, is probably a millionaire, Hank too, and yet they do all of this charity work, they do stuff that is meaningful, they make companies that have really strong values that make the world a better place. They could pocket big paychecks, and I'm sure they do, but I've heard them speak about before, having enough and feeling like I've earned enough money and I don't need more. I don't need to get bigger houses and bigger cars. I don't need to move to LA. They continue to live in Indianapolis, in Montana, and live a fairly normal life, and instead use that money to do things that they care about, do things they're passionate about, and it makes the world a better place. I think more wealthy people and more billionaires could do the same. I think John Green has a lot of privilege in being a best-selling author. His publisher would publish anything that he probably wanted to, and they were very supportive of him publishing this novel about tuberculosis. But many writers wouldn't have that privilege and would have to keep turning out what sells. Luckily, John can sell whatever he wants because he's got people like me, dedicated fans that will buy it. But he doesn't have to. He doesn't have to make the world a better place. He doesn't have to bring, attention to this issue of tuberculosis, he could just turn out a lot of like teen dramas, and you know, his books are never just little teen dramas. They always have something bigger to say about the world. They're always about making people better, making people relate to one another in better ways and relate to the world. He's always got something to say in everything that he writes. But he could probably make a lot more money and sell a lot more books by sticking to what made him popular, things like The Fault in Our Stars. But he doesn't. Instead, he follows what he's passionate about, and with his own unique flavour, really delivers on a really niche topic. I think this is great. I think this book will make a really positive impact on the world of tuberculosis. I certainly have learned a lot more about tuberculosis and will be following news about it a little bit more. And maybe because of this book, we'll be able to get the cure to more people, and people like Henry won't need to die of a preventable, curable disease in 2025. If you've read the book, let me know what you think of it in the comments. If you haven't read it, read it. Audiobook is great. It's under 6 hours. He reads it. He's great at reading it. His passion comes across. I would 100% recommend it. Subscribe to my channel for more bookish chats. Follow me on Instagram for following me on the journey. And thank you for watching. Bye!